opening prayer. Go ahead and stand, please.
This morning, our Heavenly Father, we come before you with bowed heads and our hearts. Thank you again for another day as you have kept us. Father, we just thank you for all the wonderful many blessings that you brought into our lives. Thank you for watching over us last night as we slept. Thank you for traveling grace here to the building for the ones who's on their way, to give them traveling grace. Forgive us for our many sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're in the book of Zechariah still, in chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a continuation of the narrative we started in chapter 9 last week. And I'll be honest with you about chapter 10. It was not an easy chapter. First, there's several commentaries that I use as I'm studying these books that help me. And the commentaries, these writers were all over the place. Normally, they're pretty good at agreeing as to what the text is about. This time they wasn't. Another problem is at times in this section, God speaks of a specific future historical event. And then there are other times he speaks metaphorically referring to the future regarding the Messiah and his reign. And it's not always clear which one he's talking about. There's an old study guide on the book of Revelation that came from the Sunset School of Preaching several years ago. And I like the title because I thought of that title when I was preparing this lesson. Hallelujah anyway. That's how I felt, okay? So today in our study, if it sounds somewhat confusing and I get done, you say, boy, Charles, that was a mess. Well, I'm right there with you. Okay, because I really struggled trying to put this chapter together this week. There's a lot going on in Israel's history during this time. They're, returning from captivity. They've been in captivity for 70 years. Most of them were born in captivity, if you remember. They don't remember what Judah was like before, because all they knew was Babylon and that. During this time, nations are on the move. Like the Greek civilization under Alexander the Great, he's going to be moving here and conquering the known world. And as he goes, do you know what he's doing as he's doing this? He's Hellenizing the world during this time. He's bringing Greek culture and Greek language and all that to the world at this time. And we started reading about that last week. Rome is going to be coming up pretty soon, right behind the heels of Alexander the Great at this time. And all this is happening in the world right under God's providence. Because see, God is at work in all this. Anybody know why? God's always been at work in the world, but right now I think he's really intent on what's happening in the world. Anybody want to guess why? He's preparing the world for the coming of his Messiah. He's getting everything ready. Galatians 4:4 says, "But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law." What does that mean when the fullness of time came? What is that implying there? Yes, sir.
Implying it's right along with God's plan.
It's right along with God's plan. When God had all the pieces in place, he was ready. He brought his Son in the world. And what we're reading right now in the prophets, what you're reading is God at work. And he's getting things ready. God, and that's why there's a lot of emphasis upon the Messiah in Zechariah. Because he's anticipating his Son coming into the world. He's still got about 500 years to go. But he's coming. And it's going to take time, but he's getting everything ready for that. Alexander the Great brought, what he brought? He brought a common language across the world. You know, they had not been the Koine Greek was going to become the language of the educated. It was going to become the language of commerce and business, and people all over the world is going to speak that. You know, you're so blessed with English, knowing English. I got a question. What percentage of people did you meet in Italy that spoke English?
Maybe 15-20%.
At all? Because I went to Russia, it was a lot more than that. I had no problem getting around Russia knowing just English. Because everybody, a lot of people over there knew and spoke English. I like that there, Tomsk, let's see, we went in, was a closed city during the Soviet era. In fact, the Russians didn't even acknowledge that it existed because they built nuclear weapons there. But there's this building there in town, and there's this big sign on top of this building that said in English, real estate company. And you can tell that sign's been up for a long time, you know. Everybody spoke. Now, I had no problem getting around because you always found somebody that could speak English. And that's the way it was in this time, after Alexander the Great. Everybody, there's enough people that spoke Greek. It's really the only language you needed to know to get around there. This is the first time in history since the Tower of Babel that the world had known a common language. Think about it. And then came the Romans. And the Romans and their empire, they're going to bring stability. They're going to bring commerce. Life is going to get pretty good across the empire because of all the trade that's going to go on. And the Romans, they build these roads, this road network across their empire. And you could travel anywhere in their empire on pretty good roads. Some of those roads are still in existence today, which can compare that to our road that they even last a decade. Do we get a decade out of them today? I don't think so, because it seems like they're always working on our highways, right? Because they can't keep them in. But God was getting everything ready for Jesus and the spread of the gospel. And see, God's going to take advantage of that through his church, the church in that. But this is going to be this period is going to be a very difficult time for God's people because they're going to be caught in the middle, and it's almost like a meat grinder that they're going to find themselves in. But God is with them, and ultimately they're going to survive, not only survive, but they're going to be victorious. And the true victory goal will be when his son finally arrives in the world. Because see, that's why God chose the Jews to begin with, to bring Jesus into the world. So let's go to Zechariah chapter 10, verse 1. Like I said, this is a continuation from chapter 9. It says, ask the Lord for rain in the springtime. It is the Lord who makes the storm cloud. He gives showers of rain to men and plants of the field to everyone. So he is continuing the promises that he was giving them in chapter 9. And he says, all you have to do is ask. Just ask. Ask for the springtime rain. What's important about springtime rain? Anybody grew up in a farming area? You're in the desert here. We don't know springtime rain. Monsoons, don't we? I grew up in a farming area. And the time that you really expect the rain is in the springtime. By July and August, it's dry and everybody's complaining because it hadn't rained in so long, but not in the spring. What's so important about the springtime rain? Because that you're putting the crops in the field and you want water and moisture to get those seeds to germinate and to grow into healthy plants. And so it's very important for a healthy harvest. And he said, all you have to do is ask me for them. See, that God is saying, the request is not that hard. You see, I'm the one that makes the storm cloud. I'm the one that brings rain to men and to the plants in the field. It's me. What did Jesus say in Matthew 5 about God and the sun and rain? What's that? Yeah, he said, I cause the sun to rise on the evil and the good and send rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God does. God is responsible for that. And so God's point in verse 1 here is that I'm the one who will bless you. And I'm able to do it. I have the power to do it. And see, this is the promise that God made to the Jews all the way back in Deuteronomy. How long ago was Deuteronomy at this time? About another 500-600 years before this was written. Maybe almost 1,000 years. And he says in Deuteronomy 11:13 through 15, he says to them, so if you faithfully obey the commands I've given you them, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart, with all your soul, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rain, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine and oil. I'll provide grass in your fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. What is God telling them? He's making a promise to them. What is he telling them here? He says, I will take care. If you follow me, if you obey me, I'm going to take care of you. You won't have to worry about it. I will send the rain when you need it. I'll provide for your crops. I'll provide grass for your cattle. So you will eat and be satisfied. And see, the Jews that had come back from captivity for the first 15 years or so, they were struggling. And they were struggling because they were not obeying God. And God said, hey, if you just listen to me and obey me, I'm going to bless you. And so they started doing that. And God said, I'm going to take care of you. Don't worry about it. I like Psalms 140, verses 5 through 7. It says, great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. The Lord sustains the humble, but casts the wicked to the ground. Sing the Lord with thanksgiving. Make music to our God on the harp. He covers the sky with clouds. He supplies the earth with rain and makes grass grow on the hills. Our God does things. And if he wants to withhold the rain, he has no problem doing that too. Verse 2. So in verse 1, God says, all you have to do is ask, and I will take care of things for you. Then he comes to verse 2, and he says, the idols speak deceit. Diviners see visions that lie. They tell dreams that are false. They give comfort in vain. Therefore, the people wander like sheep, oppressed for lack of a shepherd. So now God is contrasting his ability to bless with that of idols and false prophets. False prophets have been around for a long time. False prophets have been around almost since the beginning. Who's behind the false prophets? Satan is. He was right there in the garden, wasn't he? Okay? And we are not in short supply of false prophets and false teachers today. They're alive and well and very active in this world today. And you got to be careful because it's easy to fall under their spell. And here God is saying they can't bless you. They'll make a lot of promises to you. Oh, they're very good at making promises. They can't fulfill them. He said, idols can neither promise nor provide for the people. Zechariah here in verse 2 mentions three types of false guidance. The first he mentions are idols in general. That's the NIV is using the word idol. Other translations use the word teraphim or household idols. And that's what teraphims are. They're household idols. What's a household idol? An idol you keep in your house. Back then, a lot of people would have a little corner in their house where they would have their own little temple or altar set up, where they'd have their idol set up there. Can you think of any instance of that in the Old Testament that talks about that?
Rachel still their father.
Yeah, remember Rachel? Jacob, wanted to marry Rachel, ended up marrying Leah because the stepfather tricked him, and so he allowed him to work even more years so he could marry his daughter Rachel. And then Jacob decided, I got to get out of here. So he takes his wives and they flee And as they flee, remember what Rachel does? She goes into her father's house and she takes his household idols, hides them underneath her saddle. Had to been uncomfortable, you know. And why did she do that? Because she didn't understand God. And she's thinking, these gods, I'll take them because they will bless her. That's why she took them in that. And there's other passages that talk about these teraphims or these household idols. I've walked into people's homes and seen things, household idols, set up in people's homes before. They're still around today, in certain cultures especially. But anyway, can these idols really help you? He says they can't promise nor provide, okay, at all. They're nothing. They're nothing. But people hang on to them thinking that they're going to bless them. Then the second thing he mentions are diviners. What's a diviner? It's someone, a diviner is someone who promises that they can see the future. Okay? We have one next door over here, right behind us here, a fortune teller. That's a diviner. She thinks she can see our future in the cards or in the crystal ball or whatever gimmick she uses in that. But can they really see the future? No, they can't. They're good at deceit. In the Old Testament, God says that diviners can only tell lies. Look at Isaiah 44, verse 24 and 25. Isaiah 44, 24, verse 45. You know, today Christianity is full of diviners, people who claim to be prophets and that God tells them the future and what's going to happen. But anyway, in Isaiah 44, 24, it says, this is what the Lord says, your Redeemer, who formed you in the womb. I am the Lord, who has made all things, who alone stretched out the heaven, who spreads the earth by myself, who foils the signs of false prophets and makes fools of diviners, who overthrow the learning of the wise and turns it into nonsense. It said, God says, I foil the signs of false prophets and I make fools of diviners. You know, if you got somebody sitting there making a prophecy that they can tell the future, it says God's going to make a fool out of them. Make a fool out of people that listen to him too. You know, Nostradamus. You want to know how many prophecies Nostradamus? He made hundreds, if not thousands of prophecies. He wrote books. You want to know how many prophecies he got right in his life? One. He got one. He was a failed doctor, by the way. He was a trained medical doctor, but he was not a good doctor. His patients kept dying. And so he decided to get into fortune telling. And one year he predicted that the crown prince of France was going to die, and it just so happened the guy fell off his horse later that year and broke his neck and died. And all that catapulted him into being world famous across France at that time. And he wrote books, and his prophecies have been rewritten several times by various people. That's a little dirty secret, okay? How about during some of our lifetime?
Cleo.
Huh?
Miss Cleo.
I was thinking of Jean Dixon. Remember Jean Dixon? Every year, she comes out with, she's dead now. I think she's dead. I hadn't heard. But anyway, I'm sure she is. But she came out with her top 100 predictions for the year. And I mean, the news went gaga over it, remember? And you know why? How many predictions she got right in her life? One. She prophesied that the President of the United States was going to die this year, and Kennedy was assassinated. Boom! Instant fame Okay, well, we'll graft it in. All the rest of them were wrong. The 99 others was wrong. Here's the thing. When you have somebody that claims they can predict the future, God's going to make them full out. That's what he says. He's not going to give somebody the satisfaction of that. And third, he says, false dreamers. And these are people that claim that their dreams are from God. The text literally says they tell dreams that are false. They give comfort in vain. What does that mean? What is the word vain? Useless. Useless. It's not going to help you at all in that. So what's the result of men who follow these false gods? What does he say there at the end of verse 2? Therefore, the people do what? Wander like sheep oppressed for lack of a shepherd. They're shepherdless sheep. Okay? And what happened to both the northern kingdom of Israel and Judah? Because, see, they were following these false guides for years, hundreds of years. They ended up in captivity. They ended up scattered among the heathen nations because of their idolatry in that. Verse 3. Y'all are going too slow today. I'm not going to get done. My anger burns against the shepherd, and I'll punish the leaders, for the Lord Almighty will care for his flock, the house of Judah, and make them like a proud horse in battle. Because of these Jews' ancestors had rejected God and turned to idols, they had been at the mercy of these foreign kings. They were taken away by the Assyrians. You know what the Assyrians did with the northern kingdom, the people from the north? Spread them out into other areas, other kingdoms. That's what they did to but they would conquer a nation and they would literally exile the entire nation to foreign land. And here comes the Babylonians. What they did the same thing to Judah. They were scattered. Okay? However, God's now speaking to their descendants who's come home. And he says the captivity is over. The Jews have they've returned to their homes. And more importantly, they've returned to their God. And now God is telling them, my anger is against these foreign rulers who abused you over all these years. I'm going to take care of them now. And God is telling the Jews, now that you're back home, your punishment is over. God is saying, I'm going to return to you. And he says, not only will he return, but he's going to strengthen them too. He's going to make them like a war horse. When you think of a war horse, what do you think of? Big and strong and powerful. You don't want to get in front of them when they're charging at full speed, do you? I'm going to make you like a war horse. And that brings us to verse 4. And my study fell apart at this point. From Judah will come the cornerstone. From him the tent peg. From him the battle bow. From him every ruler. This verse appears to be messianic. And some of the commentaries agree with that. In fact, this whole section could be messianic, but I'll be honest with you, it's really, really hard to decipher that. And what makes this prophecy hard is that it appears that God is that this prophecy appears to be speaking of God gathering and protecting Israel. It talks about the nations of Judah and Israel when I say Israel here. NIV says from Judah, it starts out from Judah will come the cornerstone. Other translations say from him. The New American Standard Version says from them. Boy, that's throwing a wrench into it, isn't it? Okay. The Hebrew really, if you look at the Hebrew text, it's from him. So the question becomes, who's him? And most people say that's either Judah or God. They can't seem to agree which one is talking about. If it's Judah, then it's like like the NIV, it's basically saying from Judah shall come the cornerstone. And if it's from him, then it's God saying from God shall come the cornerstone. So the question is, what's the cornerstone?
Jesus.
Maybe. I was going down that.
When I read it, that's what I read.
I was going down that same road until I went to chapter to verse 5. Okay, verse 5 really threw me off on that. Okay, and a lot of them say it's the Messiah, and I think it really could be, but it really doesn't fit when you go into verse 5 because it's still talking about this, and that's what really threw me off. But he says that what he is bringing, okay, is the cornerstone, the tent peg or the nail, and the battle bow. And the cornerstone is often seen as a metaphor for a strong leader or a ruler. In the New Testament, as Nancy pointed out, the cornerstone is who? Jesus. Okay? And they're taking that from prophecy from the Old Testament. So I think you could make a very good case that this is talking about Jesus here. The cornerstone, even in the Old Testament, represented the Messiah. If you look at Isaiah 28:16, says, so this is what the sovereign Lord says. See, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone for a sure foundation. The one who trusts will never be dismayed. And then in Psalms 118:22, it says, the stone the builder rejected has become the capstone. And both of those verses are quoted in the New Testament as referring to Jesus. So it could very well be Jesus in that. The tent peg or the nail that he talks about is an indication of security. When you hang a picture, what do you put up on the wall? You want a strong nail, don't you? And you want it to go into a stud, basically, so it's secure, right? Well, that's the idea of what this is talking about here. It's an indication of security that God is going to provide them. And then the battle bow represents military strength, and it represents the fact that God will conquer all who stands in the way of his people. God is going to take care of them. And then he says, and from him every ruler. And nobody understood what that meant. In fact, they all kind of punted when they got to that section of the verse there. I looked all over trying to find a good explanation for that. Couldn't. But that brings us to verse 5. And like I said, when I was first looking at verse 4, I was sitting there thinking, well, this is talking about Jesus. And then I hit verse 5, and it just kind of threw me off. Verse 5 says, together they will be like mighty men, trampling the muddy streets in battle because the Lord is with them. They will fight and overthrow the horsemen. They appear to be God's people. And it's saying no one can stand against them. And why can't anybody stand against them? What's their secret? Because they got the Lord. God's with them. Okay? I think of the man Gideon in Judges chapter 6. Remember old Gideon? How did he describe himself? Huh? I'm the weakest of the weak. And that's pretty much what he said to him in Gideon in Judges 6:14-16. Listen what God says to him. Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? But Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midian together. See, when God is with you, no one can stand against you. You and God is a majority. And his secret was God went with him. It wasn't his ability that won the day. It was God's. Psalms 27:20, verse 7 says, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of our God. What's going to give them victory is that God is going to be with them. And as long as God is with them, no one can stand against them. Verse 6 says, I will strengthen the house of Judah and save the house of Joseph. I will restore them because I have compassion on them. They will be as though I had not rejected them, for I am the Lord their God, and I will answer them. The Ephraimites will become like mighty men, and their chariots will be glad as with wine. And their hearts will be as glad as with wine. The children will see it and be joyful. The hearts will rejoice in the Lord. Here God is speaking of both houses of his people, Judah and Israel. Another name for Israel was, they would call it the house of Joseph here. And that's the northern kingdom. They were both taken into captivity. Israel, because of their idolatry, was led away by the Assyrians in about 722 BC. And Judah by the Babylonians because of their idolatry and disobedience in 586 BC. But God had promised to return both to the promised land when their captivity was over. That was the point of the story of the Valley of Dry Bones there in Ezekiel. Know the story of the Valley of Dry Bones? God took Ezekiel out to this big valley, and there were these dry bones everywhere. It was apparently there had been a big battle there, and those were the fallen soldiers. They'd been there for years, and they had deteriorated. All that was left were bones that were bleached by the sun. And he asked Ezekiel, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel goes, God, only you know the answer to that. And so what did God do? He brought that entire army back to life before Ezekiel's eyes. And that's God is saying, that's what I can do for the house of Judah and the house of Israel. I can bring both back from the dead. And he did that. In verse 7, he uses the name Ephraim. That's another name for the northern kingdom. God is promising to bring them back home. He's saying, I've not forgotten them. They've been away in captivity longer. What happened to most nations when they were conquered and taken away in captivity? What happened to them? They disappear into history. They get absorbed by the nation that conquered them. And you don't hear from them anymore. God is saying, I'm not going to let that happen to my people. When the time's right, I'm going to bring my people back home. I've not forgotten them. God said they were never rejected. And what God is saying is that he was not going to hold their prior rebellion against him. What does that tell you about God's love? If God was man and they rejected God years before, what would we do with them? We'd have cast them off, right? Have nothing more to do with them. What does that tell you about God's love? That God said, I have not forgotten. My rejection is not going to be eternal. What is he saying?
Faithful to his word, his promise.
He's faithful. He's saying my love is unconditional. I love them. And it doesn't matter. God said, I'm going to restore their joy. Verse 8. I will signal for them and gather them in. Surely I'll redeem them. They will be as numerous as before. Though I scatter them among the people, yet in distant lands they will remember me. They and their children will survive, and they will return. I will bring them back from Egypt and gather them from Assyria. I'll bring them to Gilead and Lebanon, and there will not be enough room for them. Literally what God says there in verse 8, God said, I'm going to whistle, and they're going to come running. Dog, you whistle for your dog who's off someplace. And God said, when they come back, I'm going to make them as numerous as before. You can imagine what happened to the people over the years in captivity. Their numbers probably shrunk over time. And God said, I'm going to restore them. This passage could very well be speaking of the Messiah's time in them. And it's possible that this, like I said, this whole passage could be messianic. One of the reasons I say that, there's a passage in Jeremiah that is definitely messianic. And it sounds a lot like this section. Look in Jeremiah 23. And ask yourself, does this not sound like what Zechariah is saying too? Verse 1 of Jeremiah 23. Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. He's talking there, those shepherds, they're the false teachers, the false prophets, the idolatry, the diviners, the dreamers that we were talking about earlier. And see, that they were destroying and scattering God's sheep, his people. Verse 2. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away and have not restored care on them. I will restore punishment on you for all the evil you have done, declares the Lord. I myself will gather the remnants of my flock out of all the countries where I've driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture, where they'll be fruitful and increase in number. I'll place shepherds over them and will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'll rise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. Who's that? That's Jesus there. He's the righteous branch that comes out of David. Verse 6, in his day Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he'll be called the Lord, our righteousness. You notice his name there? I love that. Look at the word Lord. What do you notice about it? It's all cap. When you see the word Lord in the Old Testament capitalized, the Greek word is, and I can't say the word, it's about that big, but it's the 4 letters that stands for the name of God that God gave the Jews. 4 consonants. We pronounce it Yahweh. And when you see that name, it's talking about God. And he's saying that this ruler that he's sending, this righteous branch from David, is going to be called Yahweh, our righteousness. That right there says that Jesus himself is God. Jesus himself is also Yahweh, as much as the Father is. Isn't that beautiful? In that? But you read this, this sounds a lot. It's fewer words, but it sounds a lot of what we've been reading here today. That God says, my people are scattered, but I'm going to bring them home. And in bringing them home, that's part of the pieces of the puzzle. Is I'm going to make them strong again. Part of the piece of the struggle, of the puzzle, of bringing Jesus, his Messiah, into the world. And I think that's why I think these chapters are so difficult, is we kind of separate the two. We separate God bringing the people home and blessing them and making them strong again to Jesus coming home. And I think they're all part of the same thing. It's God working in the world, bringing about his purpose. And his purpose at this time is to bring Jesus into the world for us. You understand? Do you see that? No?
Yes.
I told you, this chapter is not easy. But that's what I see is going on here. Go back to Zechariah 10 and we'll wrap up here. Last 2 verses. It says, they will pass through the sea of trouble. The surging sea will be subdued and all the depths of the Nile will dry up. Assyria's pride will be brought down and Egypt's scepter will pass away. I'll strengthen them in the Lord, and in his name they will walk, declares the Lord. This sounds like they're going to pass through the sea of trouble. That kind of sounds like the Red Sea. It kind of reminds you of the parting of the Red Sea and Israelites crossing through that. Well, guess what? There's big time trouble coming for the Jews between now and Jesus coming. In fact, they're going to be caught in the middle between the power struggle between the Seleucid Empire, which is the remnant of Alexander the Great's empire, and the Ptolemaic Empire, which is also another remnant of the of Alexander's empire. It split up into 4 pieces when he died, and they're caught in the middle. And they're going to get pounded, and it's going to be very difficult. And they're going to try and destroy the Jews during this time. We talked about that last week. They're going to ban any copies of the law. They're going to ban sacrifices. And these are these other countries. They're going to ban circumcising the male infant. They're going to try and destroy Judean Israelite culture. And God says here, they will pass through the sea of trouble. They will go through it. And he said, the surging sea will be subdued. And he says, the depths of the Nile will be dried up. That's the Ptolemaic kingdom. Assyria's pride will be brought down. That's the Seleucid Empire right there. And Egypt's scepter will pass away. In all this, Egypt is going to lose their ability for self-rule. You know when that happens? When Rome arrives. Rome takes away their independence. And then in verse 12, he says, I will strengthen them in the Lord, and in his name they will walk. God is with his people, and he's going to take care of them because he's got plans for them. Big plans for them. He's not through with them. See, they have a purpose. And that purpose is to bring his son into the world. And God's going to make sure that happens. Okay, we're stopping here. We'll hit chapter 11 next week.
I'm trying.
Go forward one more.
How you doing, sir? You doing?
How are you doing?
I feel better yesterday. I think I'll get it.